Well, I have to say, as someone who likes 1980s culture, this one was kind of just okay. It wasn't a bad episode, but it wasn't really that good either. It was sort of just pretty above average. And it was a little disappointing because it didn't really recapture, of course, I knew the magic of the original Quantum Leap. We now have the answer that this is kind of a continuation of the other show. And there were nice, respectful nods to Sam and Al, and of course, the creative team behind the first Quantum Leap. So, what really happened in this episode? Well, it's a little hard to explain because usually in Quantum Leap before, we concentrated on Sam leaping into this new person and following the quest with whatever happened. But this one kind of overstuffed everything. It sort of had about 4 or 5 plot lines. I kind of lost count, and it kept adding all these weird little twists. So in this one, Ben and quote the new Al have a kind of romantic relationship, I guess. There's also things going on with the Quantum Leap project, and we kept going back to that. And I guess in a way, I'm sort of mixed. It felt more like Knight Rider. So in terms of the actual leap, apparently it's Ben leaping into someone who's basically a part of a criminal gang, and he gets himself in this whole tangle of knots, and so they have to slowly figure out a way for him to survive, to solve a certain problem, and that's about it. I mean, again, we just didn't spend enough time with the actual leap for it to make a lot of sense or to even matter. Before, what would happen is Sam would just spend a huge amount of time with what he thought he was supposed to solve. Sometimes the twist would be, no, you spent a lot of time with this person, but they're still going to die, or something unfortunate is going to happen, and you just have to move on to what the real goal of what the leap is. This one was a little confusing. It just seemed to meander all over the place and kind of skipped back and forth between being a comedy and kind of like an action film. Again, overall, it was okay. The lead actor playing the new Sam, Ben, is fine. He was adequate. I didn't hate him, but I didn't love him. It did feel like it wasn't really a Quantum Leap episode, more like they're just cobbling together other ideas from sci fi shows and action shows and integrating it into this one. I mean, I'm not going to lie, about half this episode felt like True Lies, the movie. And then the other plots that they introduced just weren't even that interesting. Apparently, there's going to be some mysteries about, well, how did this happen? And they just kept introducing a lot of wrinkles into the leaping process and into who he is. It just seemed needlessly confusing. And although I didn't dislike the other cast, I didn't particularly care. I think Ernie Hudson was pretty charismatic, but it's a very cliche, generic role. I know we're probably going to get a resolution to why is magic a part of the project and things like that. That's, I think, going to be fascinating and interesting. But basically, it's a kind of race against time. We got to get him back. We got to solve this issue. He's fighting the military bureaucracy. It's all very generic, and you're like, okay. It's just very confusing. Even the world building felt inconsistent and kind of questionable. It would seem now he would have way more advantages in terms of when the leap happens, and they did pull that off. Like, he seems to have some access to much more advanced knowledge than Sam did. And that was fine. But then you kind of wonder, like, well, this could have solved a lot of problems earlier. Why don't you just do this much sooner? I don't know. Also, kept acting like, well, you only have this possibility. One of the lines was not cringy, but kind of silly, saying, well, there's a 99 probability if you do this, this will happen. It's like, well, again, I get it. You're trying to force his hand to do something, but again, before the probabilities were a little bit more chaotic. So it just seemed kind of writers who are familiar enough with Quantum Leap doing Quantum Leap, but they're not hardcore fans. So it just felt people who did respectful nods or updating the formula, but basically turning it into Knight Rider. That's not a bad thing onto itself, but it's not Quantum Leap. I will recommend this. I thought it was good enough, but it really did feel like cosplay. I guess the best way I would describe it is kind of like DS9. After Star Trek Next Generation, people were wondering, well, could they really recreate kind of formula they had with TNG? And the answer, I think, was no. It didn't really feel like TNG. I respect what happened on DS9. They have a lot of good episodes, but it just didn't feel right. But then with Voyager, which a lot of people don't like, I think that really captured and evolved what they were doing on TNG, and it still had its own identity. And I prefer, whereas DS9, I feel more alienated. So it feels like, okay, it's fine. We want to continue the Quantum Leap universe, but they haven't quite found a way to do it. So I am kind of hoping, even if this goes away, that maybe there's going to be another spin-off series and tries again, and maybe that'll do a better job of recapturing both the feeling and the premise of the first one. This one felt more like a rough draft, and it's fine for what it is, but it's kind of like just an action series using the label of Quantum Leap. But it doesn't have much to do with Quantum Leap. Overall, it was fine. The cast is okay, but I didn't feel particularly hateful, and I didn't particularly feel like, oh wow, this is Quantum Leap again. It just felt like it was, it was fine. I'll give it a 7.25. I thought it was fine. Not particularly excited to keep watching. It's just, yeah, it was fine.